So in the last video, we were able to assemble all the components or all the elements of our card component, such as the icon label, and properly formatted the title, and the categories, the list of categories, and of course the image. So now we would want to render a bunch of restaurants and list them using the restaurant card component in this home screen. So going back to our mockup, so I said you will learn to create custom and reusable components. So we've done that. We created 3 components, the restaurant card, the header, and the icon label. We were able to style these components and use UI elements like images and icons from React Native elements. So now we're going to proceed to learning about lists. So in React Native, we can render an array of elements to the screen and add and render it with design or like with beautifully styled components through FlatList. So I've created a list of restaurants here, so I'm going to put it here. So our list of restaurants have a name. So here, so this is the coffee house. So Central Per Coffee House. The categories are beverages, desserts. So this is this line. The delivery time, it's for this icon, first icon label. The distance is for the second icon label. And the image is for this image right here. So we already added the require function here. So we can't just add the string here and then add the require here because this has to be static. Okay, so how do we render this through a FlatList? Let's go to the documentation. So anything about React Native, you can visit reactnative.dev. And these are the core components that you can use. And FlatList is one of them. So it's for rendering basic lists. And it's fully cross-platform, so you can use it in Android and iOS. And I think Windows now. There's header, footer, separator, pull to refresh, and the best part is it's already scrollable, so you can scroll it immediately. You don't have to set it up anymore. So FlatList, so this is how we will use it. Just import it from React Native here and then use it here. So FlatList has 2 required props, namely render item. So under props here, render item says required, it's a function and required yes, so this is how we render that the data that we want. And then data itself. So it's an array of all of our data. So we're going to pass restaurants. So let's get to it. React Native, so don't forget to import FlatList. And to invoke that here, so this is just the hard code. We will delete this later on, but for now, let's just leave it at that. So inside our view, so, excuse me, that's not supposed to be in the, we're not supposed to be in the restaurant card, but we're supposed to be in the home screen. Okay, so again, pasting to anywhere, you put it down below the component code or above, doesn't matter. Okay, there's an error here. Assets. So the images are not imported yet. So let's give. So in the repository that comes along with this tutorial, you can download all the images and of course copy paste the entire restaurant's list. Okay, so I hope you've already downloaded the images and pasted this restaurant's list to your own code without having to use the entire thing. Okay, so we will have to import FlatList in our home screen .js. So FlatList from React Native, and then inside you can add FlatList here. FlatList, but you have to supply the data, so it's an array. So we got that covered. It's an array of restaurants. and we get the warning. So it says virtualized list, missing keys for item, etc. So each of the items in your array should have a unique key. Okay, so we can add an ID here. It's 1, 2, ID 3, 4, and 5. So probably the one you copied already has the ID here. So you can also use the name of the restaurant as an ID, but IDs have to be unique. And if you create a large enough list, like get it from an outside database, there's bound to be some restaurants, even the same restaurants with the same name. So you shouldn't use the name as the ID because it's not unique. Okay, so there could be a Jollibee in a location that's different. Like there can be 5 Jollibees around you, so just different locations. So it's best to use ID. And then we should tell our flat list that the ID is, so the key is the ID element here. So to do that, we have to use the prop called, we're going to use a prop called key extractor there. So it just basically extracts a unique key for that array that you're passing to our flat list. So basically we're telling flat list, okay, use ID as the key. So we can get rid of this error. Okay. So to do that, key extractor, so it takes an item and an index. So you only need, so it's passing the entire item of that array. So let's say the item is restaurant, and what we need is just use the restaurant ID as the key. And now the warning isn't gone yet because IDs or keys should be strings. So you can just convert this to either add double quotes here, but if you don't want to compromise the the given data, you can just convert this to a string by calling toString. And there, the warnings are gone. Okay, so the other required prop for flat list is render item. So this is just saying that, okay, for this list, see, nothing is happening, right? Because we haven't rendered each item of that list yet. And there, it's already telling us what items are there to be rendered. So the name, the category. So it's basically the items of that list. Okay, so render item, here it has a function. So that function, according to the documentation, that function has item, index, and separators. So we don't need the index and we don't need the separators. You only need the item. So you can just get the item here. And then a fat arrow function. So these are the parameters of that function. And then we have to return the card. Okay, so just commenting this out and save. So since we're not customizing our component yet, but we do have hard-coded values, on save, card is rendered 5 times because there are 5 elements in our list. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So card is rendered 5 times. Great. Since there are 5 items on that list, but this isn't what we're expecting. We want whatever is in our list to be rendered here. So again, for us to customize this restaurant card, for us to use it in different ways, we have to pass props. So I want to pass a prop. We can pass this individually. So you can add a name here and just say item.name, etc. Or we can just pass the entire item, which is, if you print that, if you want to console log, like what the hell, what's inside the item, what is this item, save. You can console log and you can see that the item is just each item of that list. See, so it's just this object. So this is one item, and the second item, etc. And FlatList loops each item here and renders it individually. So I'd rather that we go for passing the entire item, so that if ever the list has multiple items, you don't have to modify the flat list, but you can modify the restaurant card itself, the component, to accommodate for the different other elements. Okay, so I want to pass the restaurant information. So info, and just pass the entire item. Save. Okay, so still no changes because you haven't modified restaurant card yet. We still have those hard coded values. Okay, so we have to add props here. So again, what's inside the props? Console log. Console.log props. Just to know what are we passing. Okay, delete this, save, and re-render. So every time we save, the component re-renders, and again, the props is just the individual elements of that flat list. So basically, just looping through these elements. So we can customize it by calling each of the props elements, or we can destructure props. So props contains a list of object, or just the object, and its info. So to be able to access categories, you have to go through props.info.categories. So I'm going to remove the bakery. Okay, I'm just going to start with the name because it's more visible. So to access that, props.info.category. So where's info from? Because that's how we defined it here in card. So save, and excuse me, not category but name. There. So all the items of the list is printed or is rendered in the screen here. So first is Muffin Man Bakery, next is Central Perk Coffee House, next is Wild Bread, next is McDonald's, and next is Jollibee. Great, perfect. But again, this is too long, so I don't want to keep repeating this over and over again. So we want to be able to just remove this and say, I just need the info. And then props is gone. And from that info, so if I save it here, okay, props is gone, rendering the items are the same. But that would mean to access or like to render the categories, you have to say info.categories here. And the same thing for each of the other elements, right? So okay, they're rendered correctly now. So these are beverages, desserts, cakes, and bakery, just like what's expected here. Oops, that's Central Perks. So this is this one. But you can also, another option would be to destructure this. So from info, you can get these individually here through destructuring. So the syntax is const, then curly brace, and then each of the items here from that object info. So that would be the name, categories, delivery time, distance, image. So we don't need the ID. Then from info. Save. So you can do this, or you can do this and you won't have to do this. But if you'd want to just shorten it here, which most people do, save, and this is just the same thing. So just add modifying all of the components. So for images, So just use image, and then for this, the label is what we're customizing, right? So the restaurant always has the time and the pin, so you don't have to pass that through a list. But the label is what you would want to customize. So label would be, for time, it's delivery time. And for the pin, that's the distance. So did I destructure those? Okay, cool. And there. So sometimes you need to refresh for the images especially to be rendered correctly. So while waiting for that to render, just making sure that the images are the correct path. Takes a bit of time to load, and perfect. So now the correct images are rendered on the screen. Okay, so we're almost done with our app, just some finishing touches. So for one thing, so these items are too close to each other. And second is there's this annoying scroll bar that's not really good to look at. So to get rid of the scroll bar first, FlatList has a property called show vertical scroll indicator, and so you can see it's visible here. You can set this to false. So this is Boolean, and when you set it to false, there. So the scroll bar is no longer visible. Second, we don't really see the shadow anymore. So that's not too good. So what I do is we can add another container here. So instead of card container, you can just add container to give a bit of allowance for the shadow. Style equals styles.container. So it's not a card container, it's a container for the list. And that container, oops, I have to define a new one. Container, so I put it at the top because it's the topmost element, and the width should be device width should be less than that of the card container. Okay, so it's still visible. Okay, so we can define this into a variable, const offset equals 25, so that the card container and oops, excuse me, so that the card container and the image style is assigned to a variable. So I could change this to say 35. Okay, there. And then let's just make sure. So you can see that the shadow is more defined now, although the space is smaller for this card component. So I can just change this to 30. And then make sure to align all the items at the center. Align items center. Save. And there. Okay. So still, the shadow is still a bit cutting off. So I can just increase this offset to, say, 35. Or 40. Okay, there, much better. Okay, now we also would want to have a bit of space here. So you'd wonder, okay, I want this to be there. Perfect. So you have to add a bottom margin here. Let's add it in the container. So margin bottom could be 10. Okay, good. So it adds a bit of space here, or so we added a margin top somewhere right here. So let's get rid of that. And instead of a margin bottom, we can change this to margin top. And let's give it a value of 30. Okay, too wide. 25. Perfect. Okay, so looking good. So pull to refresh. Containers gone. The horizontal indicator is, the vertical rather indicator is gone, and the shadow is perfectly appearing. Great. So now we've successfully created the Food Central application, and in this tutorial you've already checked all the boxes. So you've created the custom components, again, those three: header, the icon label, and the restaurant. We've customized them to be able to render the FlatList, using our custom reusable components. And then we were able to style these components as we went along. Thanks to fast refresh, we can see all our changes after we save. We've also used UI elements like images, icons from React Native elements, and lists, both from React Native. So that's FlatList. So for more information on images and React Native elements, you can just visit their documentation. Congratulations on making your first app through this tutorial. So I hope you learned a lot about React Native through creating this Food Central app called, this delivery app rather, called Food Central. So now you can create a lot of UI elements and components. So this is just the front end of mobile development. And now you're equipped to have that and create custom reusable components to avoid repeated code. So congratulations again, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more tutorials on React Native and other programming languages. So if you're interested in prop types, we'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye-bye.